what is happening? I truly was kind of like looking around at the beginning of the show. I was like, is this real? Like, are we going to live in this space like the whole time? And we kind of did.
Welcome to Critical Darling, the show that celebrates all the hot takes and big feels lighting up Broadway. I'm your host, Andrew Cole, and today we're going 70s retro and spending an extended period of time at a Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn as we dive in to the new stage adaptation of Dog Day Afternoon. My guest host for this episode is someone who has been a full-on theater kid from day one, evidenced by the fact that she was the president of her high school drama club. Thank you very much. She went on to earn her BFA with a focus in stage management from North Carolina School for the Arts and spent nearly a decade working professionally with regional opera companies before making an impressive pivot into tech. She most recently served as VP of Product at Arta and is currently embracing a well-earned sabbatical, diving into Somalia certification, tackling house projects at her home in New Jersey, and volunteering in her spare time. She's smart, curious, and exactly the kind of friend I look forward to gabbing about theater with. Ladies, gentlemen, and darlings across the globe, please help me welcome to the pod, Joselyn Mujica.
Hello.
Hi, I'm so happy to be talking with you, Joselyn.
Same. It's one of these shows where I was like ready to gab right after, and I was like, hold it, keep it in. You're going to get
We
an
had to sit on it. We had to sit on it. This was fun because I got to have dinner prior with you and Alina, and y'all had already bought your tickets to this, and I managed to get tickets for the same night. So y'all were sitting downstairs, I was sitting upstairs, and it's always nice to be able to see the actual same performance that we're talking about, but the nuances of how we saw it were great because we didn't have the ability or the urge to unload on each other afterwards, which is good because I feel like we have a lot to talk about.
The urge was present. We did not have the ability. Yeah, and it was like a rainy night. I got out of there, but I was like, we will get into it for sure.
Oh, and we will. So before we get to that, we've been friends for several years now, and I knew that you had theatrical experiences and grounding and your background, but I had forgotten the specifics of it. So that was so fun to hear your stage management focus in college, working with opera early in your career. As you kind of think back on the first half of your life so far, what's one of the earliest theatrical experiences that you remember sparking your imagination?
I know exactly what it was. My brother, when he's 6 years older than me, so he was in high school and I was, I don't know, in elementary school or middle school, and he was Bernardo in his high school production of West Side Story. You know, at that point, it was like the most grand thing I'd ever seen live, and just loved it, fell in love with it, and like had my mom buy me the cassette tape of the movie recording, and like just really wore that out and like loved, like I was obsessed with the song America. I just loved it. And so it kind of, he didn't really continue in the theater world, but I did. Like the minute I had an opportunity to, I like joined the high school drama club, and definitely didn't think I'd make a career out of it, but right at the last minute decided I did want to kind of stay in that world and go and get like a very specific education in stage management, which is not, you know, a common thing to do, and there aren't a lot of programs that let you specialize in that, but I got bit by the bug pretty early. Yeah.
I love that. West Side Story is such a great show, and I find that when I have these types of conversations with my friends that circle around earlier or earliest theatrical awakenings, not to be too serious about it, West Side Story comes up a lot, and it's a really interesting one to think about because when you see it as a young person, as you did, it's got everything that a great Broadway musical has. It's got great characters, it's very colorful, wonderful dance numbers, really good score, and it's just a very nuanced and kind of deep plot. And I think it's one of those shows that you can grow along with and find new things to appreciate later in life, which is kind of like the second half of this first question is, if that was one of your earliest theatrical awakenings, again, did that change or did you have other ones a little bit later in life, like in high school or college, that became meaningful to you as well?
I think that for me, I loved musical theater. Again, like coming in with West Side Story and just like loving that as like the medium. And I think the more I got into it and did it professionally, the like appreciation of straight plays and not being like, oh, that's a play, like that's boring, and just like having this like very childish assumption that like musicals are great and plays are boring and kind of drab. I think that kind of came in. And then really in college, we didn't have a musical theater program. We had a classic voice. And so that is when I got into opera. And really, now that I can spend my money however I want and see whatever I want, I still definitely gravitate towards Broadway plays and musicals. But like my love and appreciation for operas and what opera singers do and like the scale of those productions just grew so much in college. And like where I went to school, those were like the biggest budgets. Like those shows were designed from like at school, like nothing was rented, nothing was borrowed, like everything, every costume, every piece of scenery, every prop was done with intention for that show. And just like really the craft of it and like the scale of it is something that I really like learned to love in college and like felt very lucky I got to do professionally for a while.
I love that you're bringing this grounding in an experience with opera to this conversation, because that's part of the performing arts world that I'm such a noob on it still. I've only ever seen maybe one or two operas in college. I've still never seen a professional opera. And so I have a couple of friends, yourself included, who know that world and love that world. And it's on my bucket list.
Oh, I'd
I
love
need
to go
to
with you.
I would love to as well, because they do them year round, right?
Let's do it together.
Let's do it. It's the space at Lincoln Center that I've never been to, the Metropolitan Opera House, and I've had such wonderful experiences in all those other spaces on that campus that's in my near future. I feel it. And this whole conversation kind of, I feel, segues nicely into this next question. And I don't want it to be too much of a leading question, but I'll just say it, that as someone who started out working in theater and opera, but has since moved elsewhere in your career, having been in the tech world for quite some time now, what do you find yourself noticing or appreciating when you see theater today?
I really enjoying theater. Like I tend not to come in with like a really cynical perspective of like, yeah, I don't know. I love it. I'm spending my money there and like I'm spending so much time there. I see a lot of shows. I love to love it and I try to find joy and unique experiences like in every time I go. So like I really like to just kind of get lost in it and not think too much about like the how. And but I love that I have the background that I feel like it gives me a really deep appreciation for like the choices that are being made, the execution, like how something's getting done, why it's getting done, why are we telling the story, why are we telling it the way we're telling it. And I feel like I do get to experience it like just a level deeper than your average bear who just didn't work in this world. I love that. I think one thing I do notice now a little bit more is that like technology is moving so quickly. So there's a lot more multimedia, and I didn't have a ton of that. I did a little bit because I was in school and people were experimenting with that stuff in the early 2000s, but it wasn't huge. And so that's kind of a blind spot for me. So there's a lot more like, I wonder how. And I do get a little lost in that. The things that I'm not naturally understanding, I can sort of sit and pick apart in my brain a little bit. But really, I love to just enjoy it. I love to see shows do well. I love to see stories, get told in a really interesting way. I love to be able to tell people who like don't go to the theater often, like you would love this. You don't have to know theater and love theater. Like you don't have to know the cast. Like they don't have to be stars. Like you're going to love this story. You're going to love this experience. And so, yeah, I really love to see people just doing theater well, singing well, acting well, and like just using the medium like for all that it is.
I identify with that so much, and we share in common that we both start our careers in a theater adjacent role, and we've evolved in our careers since then. And I find too, the further distance that I get from having it be my full-time job, I'm able to approach new shows that I go into with a bit more of a blank canvas mindset and attitude of, I just want this to be good. I want this
Yeah.
to be a worthwhile evening at the theater. I don't necessarily know anyone in this show or know that much about the creation of it. And I think it's almost a bit of a privilege to have that type of context or open mindedness about a show going in. So, as we start to pivot to talk about this show specifically, can you tell me, Joselyn, about your interest in true crime and your awareness of the film version of Dog Day Afternoon that you had going into this show?
Yeah, so I'm like a total stereotypical, like, elder millennial meme, or it's just like I'm constantly, like, pumping true crime into my ears. I have, like, pivoted towards some lighter fare in the genre. I'm a really big fan of a podcast called True Crime Obsessed, which actually is, I think, a former ninja. He's kind of talked about learning how to his, like, kettlebell technique at Mark Fisher Fitness. His name is Patrick Hines.
Oh, yeah,
And
Patrick Hines. He's great.
yeah, he's great. His co-star or co-host, Jillian Pensavalli, also has a theater podcast that she's just wrapped up called Hamilcast. And True Crime Obsessed is this like documentary recap podcast. So they can be a little lighter about it because they're less telling the story of the crime and more kind of dissecting the storytelling somebody else has done. And then the other one I really like is called True Crime and Cocktails, which is like a little bit of a misnomer. I think they started in the pandemic when everyone was like drinking a lot, and they do less of that, but they're Canadian cousins, and they're just so nice, and they bring like a lot of like lightness, and they do like a lot of banter. Like I really love long podcasts because I am a runner, and I, recently like ran the New York City Marathon. I'm constantly like out there for hours. I'm not a fast runner, and so I need like a lot of content. And so like two ladies just like bantering for an hour and a half before they even get into like the true crime story is really my jam. So when Dog Day Afternoon came up on my radar, I'm also a big fan of The Bear, so like caught my eye. I didn't know what it was about. To be honest, I think the ads don't tell us a lot what it's about, which is a comment I will have for later, but looked it up, found out it was, a true story about a bank heist or bank robbery, I guess. And read this like Life article about it at the time called The Boys in the Bank or The Boys at the Bank or something like that. Was fascinated. I mean, such an incredibly fascinating story. And then I knew there was a film and decided the day of, you mentioned I'm on a sabbatical. So like the day we went to see the show, I think it was like a Monday or Tuesday. And I just like watched the film that afternoon and loved it as well. I am so fascinated by these like wild stories, but this one really takes the cake. It's a really topsy-turvy tale.
Topsy-turvy is a good word for it. I mentioned this to you at dinner that I was actually really glad that you had just watched the movie because I think you going into this show, having seen the film, and me not having seen the film is a really good grounding for an interesting conversation because we're coming at it with different perspectives. Jocelyn, you did a good job covering off on a couple of these elements, but I'll go ahead and formally set the stage as we dive in. Dog Day Afternoon is a new play on Broadway that traces its origins back to a real life bank robbery in Brooklyn in 1972, an event that quickly captured national attention. The story was first chronicled in the detailed Life magazine article that you mentioned, written by P.F. Klug and Thomas More, which then inspired the acclaimed 1975 film directed by Sidney Lumet, written by Frank Pearson, and starring Al Pacino. This play is written by Stephen Adly Guirgis and brings that source material to the stage, revisiting the incident and the media frenzy surrounding it through a theatrical lens. The narrative centers on Sonny Wartzik, an amateur criminal whose attempted bank heist spirals into a prolonged hostage situation, drawing crowds, police, and television cameras into an increasingly volatile standoff. As tensions mount, the story examines the personal motivations behind the crime alongside the broader spectacle it becomes in the public eye. The Broadway production comes to us from Warner Brothers Theater Ventures with a creative team that reimagines the material for the stage, including direction by Rupert Goold, scenic design by David Corrins, costumes by Brenda Abandondolo, lighting by Isabella Bird, and sound by Cody Spencer. The cast is led by Jon Bernthal as Sonny, supported by a company that includes Ebon Moss-Bachrach, John Ortiz, Jessica Hecht, Spencer Garrett, Michael Kostroff, Esteban Andres Cruz, and many more. And quick note related to spoilers that this is going to not be a spoiler-free podcast. Jocelyn and I will be talking about plot elements in the show that could potentially ruin the ending of the story if you haven't seen it. So if you don't want to have the ending spoiled for you, press pause, go get tickets to the show, or go watch the film, and then come back and hear us unpack it. So we like to start our conversations about the show with hot takes, which is where we unpack what we thought about the performances, the writing, the direction, the design elements, or any other parts of the show that really captured our attention when we were sitting there in the audience. And I will give you the first word, Jocelyn. What are some of your hot takes on Dog Day Afternoon?
Thanks. I think one of the things that really stood out that I just want to say off the top, because it's, a positive, was the set design. I think that it was just really well executed. So great. They created these like really clear spaces, both inside and outside the bank, and kind of moved between them really well. And the production design with like the integration of music in those moments. I just think I loved it so much. Really wanted to kind of give a shout out right at the top for that. I think if that is something that is interesting to folks, like I think for that, like I think it's worth a watch. So that was like something that caught my eye. Just like loved how they used the space for that.
It's one of my favorite things about this show.
Yeah,
And David Corrins, who did the set, it's really interesting because for anyone who has listened to or watched the podcast episode I did with my husband Michael on Ragtime, the set was a bone of contention or a sticking point for us in that one because David Corrins, who designed that set as well, we felt in that show it wasn't fully realized or fully built out enough for it to be satisfying for us. And this set that he and his team created for Dog Day Afternoon is exactly what I wanted from Ragtime. Not to say that they could have done this for Ragtime because the nature of this show, Dog Day Afternoon, is that it takes place essentially in the same setting for the whole thing. It's
yeah,
outside and inside this Chase Bank in Brooklyn. I think logistically there's an easier jumping off point for the set designer to go more literal and go more full tilt boogie when you're making the set because
totally.
economically and just logistically on stage you can be a lot more literal and built out with what you do when it's only one location, and I get why that would be hard for something like Ragtime, which covers many years and many locations. But when we went into the theater, you sort of see the outside of this bank set on stage, which even as upon first impression is well done. Like it's very moody and it's detailed and it feels rich. But then when they go inside the bank for the first time, essentially the whole set is on some sort of turntable where
Yeah,
it rotates, I would say, somewhere between 90 and 180 degrees to where once it's done rotating, the entire stage is filled with this very fully and richly built out interior of a bank set. You can tell Warner Brothers or just some money is involved in this because it
yeah.
looks so good. It's extremely impressive. And that alone is, I don't want to say it's worth the price of admission, but it's one of the things that I keep thinking about when I think back on this play was how excellently they executed this set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really standout. And like the transitions between those spaces was also like flawless. There's obviously a lot that happens in the interior, and that's kind of where the story begins, but there's a lot there's a lot of going back and forth where the characters, mostly Sunny, is kind of stepping out, speaking to the police. It just was very smooth, and like I loved it. I thought it was so well done. I think the performances of kind of our four leads were really excellent and felt like nuanced and true and genuine. And even though you can say like Jon Bernthal's like performance was really over the top, I think it was probably very true and like honest. Like it's a really chaotic moment. He seems to be this like really over the top character. Like this man really did seem to he be that. And so it felt like really honest to me. I think on the flip side, I felt like the ensemble cast was in a completely different show. It felt like the cast of Guys and Dolls had come in to like play the bank tellers. It was like Adelaide was like, behind the teller desk. It was just like, it was such a wild dichotomy. I felt so disconnected to me. The like gravity of the story and the honest kind of portrayal you're getting from like these four leads, Jessica Hecht, Jon Bernthal. We can talk about the Sal character in a minute, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, because I think that was like a bit tougher, but it all feels so real, so true, kind of grounded even in its over the top nature. And then the ensemble's like, popping gum and we're from Brooklyn and we're doing this and we're big and I was just like, what is happening? I truly was kind of like looking around at the beginning of the show. I was like, is this real? Like, are we gonna live in this space like the whole time? And we kind of did.
So you're a perfect person to ask this to, having seen the movie, because first of all, I totally agree with you. I thought a lot of those female bank teller characters, Jessica Hecht notwithstanding, which we'll talk about her in a second, they did feel very cartoony. They felt very caricature-ish, which seemed like both a directorial and a stylistic acting choice on the parts of these theater professionals that made this show. Is that what they were like in the movie?
No. No, the movie is very, very much more grounded, much more just very realistic. Yeah. There's kind of one character in the film that her character name is Squirrel, like Squirrel Girl, because like she's found hiding under a desk, and she's kind of a funnier character, but it's far more subtle. It's really just limited to her, and it's so much more sober. Like the film is than the play.
That's good to know, and I think it pulls out something that I feel like we'll talk about. I wouldn't be surprised if we bump up against it for the remainder of this conversation, which is this show has some real tone issues. Or maybe I should say, it struck me that it's trying to do a lot of different things tonally. If you just read the show and know the plot, it's a drama, right? It's a dramatic show, but there are some very funny elements and funny performances in this. And so I think in some places it kind of tries to be a comedy. And you speaking to the almost the different show that it felt like the supporting cast was in, now that you say that, I really agree with that. I think that, first of all, it's a very large cast. It's a large cast for a
Yeah.
play. I want to say there's maybe about 20 people in it, maybe slightly under. And that's a big cast for a play on Broadway. And I think that when you take any type of work and you adapt it for the Broadway stage, specifically if it's a play, you have a lot of different directions that you can go. And it seemed like the team on this had a number of ideas of the directions that they wanted to go, and they just didn't settle on one.
I feel like there was like a lack of understanding of like why we're telling this story, like why this story is important. And I think that then gets reflected back to you in the choices that are made. The cast did not feel kind of grounded around one reason for being there, or like why the story was being told in the manner it was being told. Some people are there playing it for laughs, and some people are there trying to tell us this like genuine story about, probably someone's worst day and like their worst impulse and some sort of desperation that brought them to robbing a bank, which feels like a really true, hard story to tell. And then you've got these like really over the top, like cartoonish characters who are there telling us a totally different story. And I think that there's something missing there. There was a lack of kind of cohesion there. And I think that probably started, at the top with like the direction and those choices, or lack of choices, I guess.
I want to pause for a second and just talk about Jon Bernthal, because he is the lead character of the show. To me, he's the standout performance from
Absolutely.
this play. This is his Broadway debut, which I think is very impressive to headline a show for your Broadway debut, have as much of the stage time as he has, because he really is in the majority of the show. And he turns in a performance that is, I think, really well grounded, lots of good emotional beats to it. These tone issues that we're talking around, he didn't let that slow him down. Like when he's needing to be dramatic, I felt that he was dramatic. When he's needing to be somewhat funny, I found him to be pretty funny. And he's having a little career hot streak at the moment, right? He's I'm reading from his bio. He, of course, is in The Bear. I've only watched the first 2 seasons of that show, but he's the flashback brother who has passed away. So he's
Right.
Jeremy Allen White's older brother who's passed away, and his character looms large, and he's featured in flashbacks in that show. But he is a big part of that show's plot. He's also known for The Walking Dead, the Accountant film franchise. He's going to be in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey coming up, which is a big deal. So he's great. I think this is a wonderful vehicle for him. Other than the set, him being great is the one thing that I'm taking away from this show.
I totally agree. I think his performance was excellent. I think he is, for folks who kind of worry about, movie stars getting cast in Broadway shows, I would say, like, fear not. Like, he's wonderful in it. I think I don't know if it's kind of important to let your audience know, but we did see this in previews. And so there's a chance that, like, things have evolved, but he, even in previews, I think he'd really done a lot of the work. He had found his character. His stamina is incredible. I mean, he's up there screaming. My opera lens, I'm just like, how's your health? Like, how's the voice? Like, are you resting? Are you drinking tea and steaming and all of this? Like, he is really giving an incredible performance. I totally agree. The set and Jon Bernthal are really the standout moments for me in this show. I don't know if you noticed this. I noticed it because I watched the film that day. So, Ebon Moss-Bachrach and Jon Bernthal are in The Bear, you just mentioned. And I thought it was a really interesting, and I don't know if this was a purposeful choice, but in the film, these two characters are played by Al Pacino and I think John Cazale. And they also had a kind of built-in audience for them in being together because they were in The Godfather together. I thought that was like an interesting similarity that the film and the play have. I think that unfortunately, my next hot take is that there just wasn't enough for Ebon Moss-Bachrach I think he is so incredible. I love him in The Bear. I think he's one of the like most three-dimensional characters like on TV. It felt like there wasn't enough for him. I think he did a great job. I just wish there had been more. And I think he did a great job with what was there. Having seen the film, having read the article, I didn't understand a lot about the choices they wrote for the play version of this character. He's very odd. Like he talks about doing a lot of drugs, which I didn't pick up from any other bits of the source material. He has this history of being in jail that I also didn't pick up from any of the other source material. Like a lot of really strange choices that I think made the character probably really challenging. So again, like total hats off. I think he did a great job with the character that was written for the play. I think the character that was written for the play, though, is very strange, and I didn't totally understand a lot of those choices.
I'm right there with you. It's good. Well, let me ask you this, just screen time wise in the movie, Ebon Moss-Bachrach's character is Sal.
Yeah.
So he has, I mean, certainly compared to John's character, Sonny, very little stage time. So was that different in the movie? Like, did they have a little bit more for Sal to do, or was he similarly kind of very, very supporting to Sonny?
I think it's similar. I think
Okay.
he's very supporting. He doesn't have as large a role. He's very much the quieter of the two, and I think that probably is true of whatever happened that day. Sonny is like the bigger character, but it was I think just a more serious character. I think that's like a theme throughout all of this is that the play has some like sillier themes than the source material would suggest.
I'm relating to what you said, or I validate what you said about the choices or the background that they gave Eben's character of Sal in the play. There's a couple of references at the beginning to him being high, like, are you on drugs again? And then through a couple of the conversations that happen throughout the rest of the play, I almost took away that the Sal character is, I don't think neurodivergent would quite be the right word, but he has some behavioral challenges where it was really hard for him to trust other people, to communicate with other people. And so you can tell there's things going on with that character. And I think, as written at the time that we saw this show, I think Evan did a good job trying to bring that to life. But I just don't think there was a lot on the page yet for him to work with. And I think it goes back to something that you mentioned at the very top, the way they've decided to market the show. I actually have the playbill open right now. So if you're
Same.
listening to this, it's, a lovely moody picture of John and Eben in 70s clothing, etc. And so from all of the ads for this show, I assumed this was going to be a two-hander between these guys, and they were going to be sparring partners or going back and forth, and it was going to be you'd get really richly into the life of both of them. And it's a bit of a, I'll say for me, it was a letdown that you come and yes, Jon is amazing in this. I felt really bummed that I didn't get to see more from Ebon, who is a really good actor. I think you're right, and that's so cool that you pulled out the association of The Godfather being the previous work that sort of propped up thematically and marketing wise the film. I think they totally did try and do that with this show. They are trying to ride the wave of the popularity of The Bear, and I
Yeah.
think the very large audience that has associations with these two, and sort of trying to say, hey, don't you want to come see these two in a new dramatic adventure, which it doesn't quite pay that off at the end because of the relatively minor positioning of Evan's character versus Jon's.
Yeah. I think in reality, you could have put Jessica Hecht on there with Jon Bernthal, and it would have been a little bit more accurate in terms of like their dynamics. Like they kind of spar a lot in the show in a way that I think works really well. And I think she's kind of a funny character. She's like a real Brooklyn. She's like the head teller. She takes that job incredibly seriously. They have a really interesting dynamic throughout the play, and it kind of she's I think probably an amalgam of real life people that were in the bank that day, but there does feel like an honest representation of like the dynamic that like these bank robbers and these hostages created that makes this story like worth telling, which is I think for folks who don't know, like one of the funny things here is that the hostages in the bank were not terribly afraid of these two bank robbers. Like they were kind. They kind of came in to get their money and they wanted to go. It turned into this like mayhem, but like they were the article it kind of says like I think the bank manager says like, "Oh, I haven't laughed so hard like in years or something from the hours he spent as like a hostage." And several people over the course of this like stand up have an opportunity to leave and choose to go back in the bank. Like I think the bank manager gets seen by a doctor and has the opportunity to leave and he goes back in. And the like head teller does as well, which they do represent in the play. And so like the whole thing, there is like a lot of hijinks. I'm not meaning to say that like the what happened was completely somber and serious. Like it is this over the top story. That's why it kind of captured the nation and people's imaginations. But I think the play just took the silly factor kind of over the top. And I think you see that a lot in like Evan's character, where, I mean, I think it's some like right at the top, he like pees. I don't know where that came from. I'd be interested to know if they had more, you know, than I am aware of that like led to some of those choices. But it felt strange and disconnected. And like, I feel like you didn't the story is funny. I mean, the story is like really interesting, this dynamic they create in the bank. And I think it would entertain and would make people laugh and feel without pulling them out in these like really over the top kind of comedic choices that were made for all of these characters. I thought Jessica Hecht really was really great at straddling that line.
I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of great stuff that you just said that I want to unpack. So I'll start with Jessica Hecht and then go to some of the hijinks. I liked how you refer to it like that. That's really accurate. When I said I took away from this how good the set design was and how good Jon Bernthal was, I do want to add to that list Jessica Hecht because she is very good in this. She plays Colleen, the head bank teller, and she's one of those good in everything actors that the first thing that I always think of when I think of her is the character that she played on Friends for so many years, right? She played Susan, which was the lesbian life partner of Ross's ex-wife, Carol. And I've just always like known of her as that. She was really good in that role. I hope she's still getting great residuals for that. But I've been able to see her in a lot of theater in New York in the time that I've been here. I saw her in the A View from the Bridge revival that was with Liev Schreiber and Scarlett Johansson years ago. She got a Tony nomination for that. I got to see her in the Fiddler on the Roof revival as Golda. She was really good in that. Just last season, she was in Eureka Day and she got a Tony nomination for that. So she's just one of these people who, yes, she works consistently on the stage, which is commendable and impressive, but she always brings this groundedness and earthiness and reality to anything that she does. And she can play drama really well. And she can also play drama into comedy really well. And anytime I see her in the cast of something, I'm like, oh, well, they know what they're doing if they hired
Yeah.
her to do that. So she's very good and worth seeing in this as well. Though everything that you're talking about, the kind of hijinks of this group of hostages that pretty quickly understands that these captors are not professionals at this. And yeah,
Far
they
from it.
have at certain moments like a weapon held to their head. So it is a hostage situation, but then not. It's a very weird thing to try and build dramatic tension around. And it's largely as we kind of transition into the next part of the show, Big Feel. So diving deeper to talk about the show's deeper meaning, themes, and what we left the theater thinking or feeling. I'll start this off and then I'll kick it to you. Like one of the things that I left the theater thinking or feeling was they didn't really do a good job setting up any meaningful dramatic tension. And part of it has to deal with the fact that it was this unique relationship between the hostages and Sonny and Sal. And because there was this understanding that pretty early into the show that the hostages would rather be with the captors, I kind of found myself thinking like, why are we watching this? Like, what is the story? What is the plot here? And there were one or two times where he being Sonny would take one of the hostages outside of the bank, and the bank at that point was surrounded by cops or helicopters or whatever, media. And then the hostage would decide to go back inside, and I just didn't know what to do with that. Like the very end of Act 1, if I'm remembering correctly, it was sort of like the first big standoff between Sonny and a lot of the law enforcement and media outside. And I just was thinking to myself, why didn't they just shoot him? Like, if they were really so concerned about all these hostages being inside and they had a clear shot at him, they could have just shot him right there and it would have ended. That just seemed illogical to me. And similarly with Act 2, I thought that it was a just almost a completely different show from Act 1, and, like, the further it got into it, it was very unclear to me, kind of going back to a comment that you said at the beginning that I really agree with. What was this show trying to say? Like, why is now the right time to say it? I wonder if any of that resonates with you.
Totally. We haven't given, we warned the listeners, but we haven't given like the big spoiler, which is like the motivation for the bank robbery. So if it's okay, I might do that now. But I was shocked that that did not come at the end of Act 1, that was not the beat we left like the audience with to go think about. Like, so did you know the motivation before coming to see the play?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so the motivation for Sonny robbing the bank is because he needs the money. He wants to get the money to give to his partner, who he refers to as his wife, a sex change operation that they have, I think been told that they should get and want to get. And this is all of a sudden you've got this story becomes like an LGBT story, which, like, again, like the marketing does not tell us, like nothing tells us this. I think, is so fascinating, so interesting. And we don't even find that out until Act 2, which I think was so strange. I did not understand why we didn't like reveal that at the end of Act 1. I didn't get the reason why we waited. I didn't get the delay. It wasn't like it didn't hit more in Act 2 than I think it would have earlier in the show. That was kind of a strange choice for me, to be so far into the show before you realize, like, what are we doing here? Like, who are these men? Why are they doing this? How are they blowing it so badly? And then the pacing is so hard because the show feels kind of slow. And then it feels like a lot happens really quickly. It just felt really tough for me.
Hearing you talk about it in that way, I do now really question why they decided to leave that for the second act, because me going in not having seen the film, not knowing that this was part of the plot, or I should really say a pretty foundational part of the plot, I went through waves in the second act of trying to quickly catch up to the story that I was watching. The first wave just being that John's character, Sonny, is gay, and it sort of played almost for last at the beginning because the hostages and Sonny and Sal are inside the bank watching some of the news coverage. And at this point, they've been in for many, many hours. And so the reporters have discovered information about Sonny and Sal. And so one of the reporters on the newscast says alleged homosexual or something like that about both of them, actually. It's initially, for a moment, almost played like a joke. And then Sonny says a few more lines and you understand, no, he actually is gay. And that's part of his story. Unclear on Sal. They didn't really develop that anymore. I don't think he is, but that was just sort of out of left field for me. Then, through the remainder of the second act, the story does become a lot about Sonny's relationship with Leon, his partner. So Sonny used to be married to a cis woman, and they are no longer together anymore. And for the last, presumably several years, he's been with this person named Leon, who is played by Esteban Andres Cruz. I hope my pronunciation's okay.
I think you did a great job.
And
Yes.
thank you so much. And I looked at Esteban's Instagram before this. They go by they, them pronouns. So I'm going to refer to Leon by they, them pronouns because it's not clear in the show, nor was it the norm in 1972, 1975 to have clarity on preferred gender pronouns. But part of the issue or challenge I have with this play is the decision to tell this story in 2026 in this way. It's clear that this is a trans person, Leon, this character, Leon, who was born a man and now identifies as a woman. And in 1972, when this story is set, there's not a lot of fluency or precision around how this character wants to be regarded with relation to their gender. And so that was initially off-putting to me, but I sort of thought to myself, well, okay, back in the 70s, this was not part of the cultural dialogue. We hadn't yet evolved in a way to talk about it with that nuance. Fine, period specific. Let's keep going with it. But the further it got into Leon's character, the more I just understood or recognized that this was a portrayal of a trans person that isn't the most flattering, which isn't, I don't want to minimize or question anyone who was in Leon's position back in 1972. Presumably, there were probably many M to F trans members of the community who sought gender affirming care and for any reason couldn't get it, right? That was probably at that time and is still a very understandable challenge for someone to face. But the Leon character is fresh out of the loony bin. Like they were in a mental institution and their relationship with Sonny and sort of their desire to have this gender affirming surgery is wildly unclear. And so it feels like it's taking this quite important and nuanced story and not really treating it with the care or intention that it deserves. And I think we can chalk a lot of that up to the fact that it's adapting an existing story. But that goes back to my whole original question that you really started off with. Like, why are we telling this story right now? Right? Like, aren't there a lot of other, if this is a story about the gay experience, the trans experience in the 1970s, which I don't know that it is really trying to be that, but it kind of felt like that. If that's what this show is supposed to be, why is this the story that we're putting millions of dollars into a new Broadway play in 2026 to tell? Like, I would much rather go watch the original film and regard that and treat that as like this moment in time, edgy, forward-thinking piece back then,
Yeah.
than see it put back on stage and me question a lot of the things of why are we spending time on this particular story.
Leon's character is like just totally played for laughs. It's wild. Like there's very little like humanity there. It's a total caricature. And I think was really off-putting to me. And you brought a lot of care into this discussion about like how we would reference this character and this and whatever. I think so much more than the show brought, like, to be honest. There's messiness that is, to your point, like very inherent in both the article, the film, and the play around pronouns and identity, because we didn't have the language and the vocabulary that we have today, and like the awareness that I'm okay with. I'm okay with like the messiness of like using wife and using he pronouns, because like you see that in the article, and that would have been very true and representative of the summer of 1972. So like I'm totally okay with all of that, and that being messy and being really unclear, and I think not how we would handle it today. But I really did not. I was really put off by the choice to just make this character a total mess. Like there's just like no humanity. In reality, this person is brought straight from a hospital to the scene of the bank in a hospital robe. You can see a photo of it in that Life article, after attempting to kill themselves, or at least kind of overdoing it on like barbiturates. So like this is like a desperate moment. The relationship is rocky. There's clearly like a lot of contention there, a lot of history. The relationship is maybe not super healthy. There's so much there. It's so rich. These are real humans who are having like a real conflict, interpersonal relationship. There's so much there, and the whole thing is played for laughs. And I was so put off by that. I was really, and that's not to say anything about like the character or the actors and like their choices. I'm really not trying to beat up on them. It's just, I think it's like written. I think it's on the page that like this character is just really silly and not serious. And the situation is kind of silly and really unserious. And I didn't like that. I was really put off by that.
It's so interesting that we didn't talk about this at all before we hopped on, and we were really struck in the same way by this particular part of the story. I walked away from this one thinking, and I thought in the week or so since we saw it, about the lead producer on the show is Warner Brothers Theater Ventures, and they're an example of a corporate entity or media content powerhouse that's done a lot on stage, right? They've done, let me pull up a couple of examples. In terms of plays, the most recent Broadway production, or the Broadway production of Good Night and Good Luck with George Clooney, was theirs. They did a stage version of Misery several years ago with Bruce Willis and Laurie Metcalf. So they've done a couple of plays. I didn't get to see Good Night and Good Luck. I heard it was good. I did see Misery. It was wild, but it was kind of interesting. And they've done a lot of musicals. So they won the Tony a couple years ago for The Outsiders. They did Beetlejuice, which I saw multiple times. And actually, they brought the tour back to Broadway this season. So that'll be a future podcast episode. I think it's a real slam dunk when you take a show or a movie like a Beetlejuice and you sort of think, oh yeah, that'll be a good stage show. And they do, and it's a musical and it's great. This feels almost like a money grab of Dog Day Afternoon is a piece of IP in the Warner Brothers catalog that won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. And as a marketing vehicle with the two guys from The Bear, this edgy piece of 1970s cinema, let's bring that as a play to Broadway. Even just like the set and the production design, that all works on paper, and I can get why the show got financed in the way it did. But then when you get down to the nitty-gritty of the heart of the show and what it's saying, I don't fault the actors, I don't fault the designers, I don't fault anyone other than just to say, we didn't need this. We didn't need this movie as this play at this moment. Like, it's not, I don't think it's helping anything or really adding anything other than a great moment for Jon Bernthal. So yeah, just sort of like, it made me feel a little icky afterwards.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that also one thing that on the flip side of the Leon character, Jon Bernthal's character, once you know he's come out, he has a phone conversation with Leon. And I found myself being a little bit confused about his mannerisms change a lot, right? He becomes much more effeminate. Like there's no tell until they tell you with their words that he is gay, right? There's no hints, there's nothing. There's nothing in the body language, nothing in the voice. And then once you know, a little bit later, he has this phone call with Leon and everything changes. His entire body changes. It's a lot more feminine, a lot more. I was a little bit confused on whether that was like, well, now you know. And so now we're going to lean into that, which feels really dishonest. Like he either is or is not effeminate or has these moments. Or I didn't know if maybe it wasn't that so much, or as like maybe it's just a very intimate conversation. And so he kind of like puts a guard down or like becomes more comfortable, and it's a private phone call, a kind of private, I guess. And he's just more himself, and that the other kind of representation of himself is like this mask, like Brooklyn 70s, guy, is the less honest version. And I felt like there was something there, and I wanted it to be more intentional. I wanted to understand whether that was like what that was. I wanted to know, like, is this happening because it's intimate and it's quiet and it's comfortable? Or is this just a direction that like was okay, well now you can just be more gay, whatever that means. Like you can just be more visible in your gayness. I felt a little confused by that. And then that also felt really disingenuous to me. Like that moment that I think should have been a really great moment, kind of I felt myself in my head thinking about like these choices and what am I watching?
I mean, that's a really nuanced observation, and I think it can lead into a super rich conversation. I'll say two really quick thoughts on it. Number one being that my immediate take from that wasn't actually that Jon Bernthal's characterization of Sunny became more effeminate. I read it as more emotional or more wearing his heart on his sleeves, more
Okay.
vulnerable. But I think it's a good point because also the second thing I was going to say is it brings up this it's not an age-old question, it's really just a recent question of who is quote unquote allowed to play and tell gay stories, right? Do you need to have a person who identifies as a homosexual playing a homosexual? Same thing with trans characters, right? I'll speak for myself as a gay person. I'm totally fine with a Jon Bernthal who is a heterosexual male bringing intention and care and purposefulness to his portrayal of this gay character. I think it all has to do with intention and, like I say, purposefulness with
Yeah.
that. And in that way, it's okay. And so maybe because I thought that everything leading up to those later scenes with him, he almost like earned credibility in my mind with how A, good he was in it, but B, that I didn't feel like he was taking any sort of, for lack of a better term, cheap shots. That didn't strike me as much as the overall problematic plot or story that we found
Yeah.
ourselves in. Didn't bother me as much as that did, or that was like so distracting to me. The other thing too, real quick, is that I was reading a bit before this on there's so many layers to this story in terms of like this is the play based on the movie, based on the Life magazine article that was based on true events. Like there's it's a whole game of telephone. But there were a couple of articles that came out, I guess around the time of the movie, that were sort of saying that in the movie and certainly in this play, it's portrayed that the reason they robbed the bank is so that the Sunny character could get money to pay for this Leon character's gender affirming surgery. And there was a Village Voice article that said that's maybe part of it, but also it could have very well been that Sonny and Sal had a lot of mob money that they had to pay off. And so I think that in each step that this story has taken from real life and then filtered through the journalistic Life magazine lens, then filtered through the Hollywood lens, then filtered through the Broadway play lens, like we are really, I assume, quite far from what was actually true and reality. And it's not very nice or neat to be able to go into multiple potential inspirations or reasons for why these guys did what they did. But whatever those reasons were, you know that the full story isn't on this stage because it's probably a lot more complicated than what we were shown it to be.
Totally, but that also feels like a real dropping of the ball because like there was so much to pull from, like, and you had the benefit of having the story told before. And it's again so rich. You could have really gone in there and taken great care and told like a really incredible, important story. Instead, you end up with what you said, like a game of telephone where it's getting diluted and getting sillier and sillier the more it's told. And so I think that feels like the big miss here is that like it wasn't treated with care, it wasn't treated with any sort of like import. What you're left with is like kind of an uncomfortable story to watch in some ways.
Yeah, it is. And this is probably a good segue into the final section of our show called Should You See It? This is where both hosts offer their final verdict and rating by sorting it into one of four distinct tiers. Those tiers being nah, which means the show doesn't land, catch it if you're curious, but your time and money might be better spent elsewhere. Meh, which is truly a mixed bag. The show has some nice moments, but not quite enough to stick the landing. Yas, which is a hearty yes. It delivers, it entertains, and it's well worth seeing, even if it doesn't totally change your life. And hell yeah, which is a full body standing ovation. Run, don't walk. This is why we love Broadway. This rubric is built to foster conversation rather than scorekeeping, and it reflects Critical Darling's mission to treat theater with both honesty and affection. So I will again give the first word to my guest host, Joselyn Mujica. What rating would you give Dog Day Afternoon?
I would give it a meh because I really do think that if you have the time, if you have the money, I think it's an excellent performance by some of these like lead actors. Again, I think the set is incredible, but pulling a little bit from what's the first one? Nah.
Nah.
I think if you don't have the time and you don't have the money, it's okay to miss this one.
I'm right there with you. I was thinking about giving this one a nah, but the more that we talked about the good parts of this show, the more I felt compelled to not give it that rating. So I'm there with you. My rating for this one is it's a meh. It's like a meh with a nah rising, if you will.
Yeah. Well
And
said.
I think that I mean, we got to some pretty good places in this conversation. Like one of the things that I don't think that we mentioned was in addition to it's what I would characterize as a fumbling of the LGBTQ plot points in Act Two, it's just trying to do a lot of other things, right? Is it trying to give a power to the people message, a defund the police message? Is
Oh
the federal
yeah.
government corrupt? Is it because the media is invasive? Is it that the public is a ravenous, unchecked cancel culture entity? It brushed momentarily against all of these things and just never really lands with the clarity to say any of that meaningfully. But I just go back to I don't think that we needed this movie as a Broadway play. Under other circumstances, it would be a nah, but John's really great. Jessica's really
Yeah.
great. That set sure is good. I think that if any of those things interest you, those are worthy enough to like push it slightly over the edge. But what a unique show.
What an interesting adventure. I thought I was going to love it. And I found it to be tough. This was not what I was expecting. I was like, this is my true crime. This is my Broadway. This is like, I'm going to love this. I'm going to love talking about it because I love to love things. And I feel, although it was wild, it was like a wild watch and I didn't love it. I feel like that actually gave us a ton to like really dig into. So I feel really lucky about that.
I do too. Thank you again for being game and picking this one to see with me and for having such a great conversation on it. I'm really grateful for you and just nitty gritty conversations on theater that
Love it.
might not land, but we sure do connect on it afterwards. So I can't wait, Jocelyn, for our future opera date. We'll get that on the calendar soon,
I
I'm
can't
sure.
wait. I have thoughts.
Okay, great. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, my darlings, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the show. Big thanks to my friend Joselyn for engaging in that conversation with me. I love that conversation. I hope you did too. There's something about being able to share your thoughts with and unpack kind of divergent opinions or beliefs about things you just saw with someone else, and then when them sharing with you what they thought, having it line up with what you thought, and then you somehow feeling a little less crazy in a way. I don't know. That's how I felt about that one. So thanks, Joselyn, for going on that adventure with me. Critical Darling is produced by me, Andrew Cole. Artwork is by Eric Emsch. Editing is by JH Productions, and music is by Standout. Thank you, my loved and valuable and supportive listeners, for continuing to enjoy the show. Please tell your friends about it if they are looking for some more Broadway pondering and pontifications in their life, that would be most appreciated. And be sure to tune into the next episode when we look back at an earlier play from this Broadway season, Liberation. Can't wait for this one, and I'll see you then.